My brother was chosen by my parents to manage our family business rather than me, but he was ultimately convicted of money laundering. I had been assisting my parents in building their business for the last couple of years, and approximately 2 months ago, they made the decision to invite their adorable elder son to take over. At that moment, I made the decision to sever all relations with my family and leave the family company because, let's face it, my brother wasn't a decent man, and I thought it was ridiculous. He's not awful in the sense that he was cruel to me once, rather. I mean that he is an outright criminal. It's not as though my parents were unaware of this, rather. They were aware and chose not to care. Whether he is a criminal or not. They would always spoil their eldest son. Male, I'm 26, my sibling is 30. He had been quite dishonest since we were little. Lying, cheating, and stealing were all part of his routine. It wasn't even like he was skilled at it. He used to be caught rather frequently, but our parents never really took any action. They would always make things right with him, even after they reprimanded him a bit and grounded him for a few days. Eventually, he realized that he could get away with it if he was charming enough with our parents. But I could see straight through it, so it didn't work with me. And I wasn't fond of him. We have had a fierce sibling rivalry since the beginning, since I used to believe he was a nasty guy and never tried to get along with him, and my parents felt I was a stick-up, so they would insist on spending time with us even though we would both detest it. We eventually parted ways to pursue our own jobs, and our only opportunity to be together was over the holidays. A few months after I graduated from high school, my parents informed me that my brother had been sacked from his job at the firm he had been employed by due to allegations of fraud, which were now under investigation. After growing up with him, I was not shocked in the slightest because, even as a teenager, he had already shown signs of being a juvenile offender for a very long time. He was on the run for a few months, but finally, I suppose with my parents' assistance or whatever, he was able to get the charges dropped and everything was back to normal. This was perhaps 3 or 4 years ago, and from what I recall, my parents chose to sever their relationship with him as a way of disciplining him after they helped him out by writing off his company with large sums of money. I was thrilled that my parents had finally made the correct decision, thinking at the time that this was probably the first time they had done so. Approximately at the same moment, my father requested me to start working for him and supporting him in the family company. I had recently received my degree. Since I was already seeking for work, I reasoned that working for your own family's company would be the best option, and I consented. Ever then, I had been the one putting in a lot of effort with my parents to manage the company and gain experience so that I could ultimately take over. Since my dad was still a long way from retirement age and had no intention of handing up control of his company so quickly, nobody had mentioned it. However, I had it in my head that I would inherit everything once my dad retired. Since my brother was not included in the photo at the time, I was very certain of it. But around 6 months ago, he made contact with my parents, telling them that he truly wanted to apologize for everything, and that he needed their second opportunity to show them that he had changed. He said that over the last few years, he had gone straight and been employed lawfully. My brother was tired of living outside of the city and was eager to return home, even though he was making a lot of effort to convince people that he was now a true employee at a reputable firm. But he would keep his distance from our family if it was against my parents' wishes. He was the worst, so I felt like they should have just warned him to stay away, but my parents softened and decided to accept his forgiveness and welcome him back. I informed my parents that I opposed the plan and that it would not work, but they reminded me that everyone has the right to a second opportunity, which silenced me as I was unable to respond to them. Furthermore, since our family company was doing very well and I didn't want to cause difficulty for myself or my siblings by arguing inside the family, I had little choice but to get along with my parents. Besides, I lived away from home, so I wouldn't have to see him or see him very frequently, and as long as it had nothing to do with the business, that made me happy. When he returned, my parents and he appeared to be quite pleased with one another. He appeared to have changed at first, especially when they threw a party and had a little family reunion. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to believe him. I knew I should have followed my instincts and notified my parents, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin everything for them. After a few months, my brother and I had no contact with one another. However, I was aware that he had been living with our parents since returning to this area, which I found suspicious as he had been employed for the previous 3 or 4 years and ought to have some financial independence. I didn't accept his story that the sole reason he had returned and was living with his parents was because he had missed them so much and wanted to make up for it. I was correct when I felt that something wasn't quite right about the whole situation. Nevertheless, my parents advised me to stop seeing him because they felt I was being overly doubtful and suspicious, so I did. However, I couldn't resist confronting my dad about it when he wanted to start teaching him things and bring him to work 2 months ago. At that point, my father decided to inform me that, as he intended to retire shortly, he was preparing my brother to take over the company when the training was over. After testing my brother for a few months, he would begin the paperwork. I was taken aback since, despite my hard work, I had thought that my dad would leave the firm to me in the event that he retired in the near future. That would be the right thing to do, but he informed me that day that my brother was the first in line to inherit the company because he was older. It didn't matter that, unlike me, he had never worked a day on the family firm. My parents had discussed with him the possibility of receiving training once he graduated, but he had shown little enthusiasm in the idea. That day, after talking to my mom, I got into a furious argument with my dad. It dawned on me that she was on his side as well. I attempted to explain to them how foolish it was of them to be handing over the company to a man who had previously been charged with fraud, and that they would have to pay for his bailout. But they told me it didn't matter since it was their son and everyone makes mistakes, so they were willing to overlook it. They made an attempt to placate me by saying that as company partners, my brother and I could both be in control. But that has never worked out. I thus made it very plain that I did not want anything to do with him, and that I would be leaving the company if he continued to be involved in it in any way. Having him at my workplace was the tipping point for me. It was already difficult enough to put up with him being a member of my family and my biological relative. After much back and forth, my parents ultimately made the decision to consult with him. I made the decision to cut my losses and just quit my family in order to focus on other things, even though it left me feeling like a total idiot for having worked so hard on the family company for the previous several years. Since then, I've been trying to get a work for the past 2 months, but I'm not putting any pressure on myself because I have enough money to survive for a while. While working in the family business, I was earning a respectable living, but at this point, all I could think about was the future, and how I would deal with the realization that my parents would never again be able to think clearly, and that my brother would end up with everything I had worked so hard for. Since I had devoted many years of my life to the company, and they had no right to take it away from me, I had even entertained the thought of suing them. However, nothing had been officially confirmed in writing, so I was unsure of what to do. Besides, they hadn't even asked me to go, and because my dad owned the company and was the boss, he was free to do as he pleased. As it happens, karma never allows anything to remain unchecked for very long, so I didn't really need to do anything. Just 2 months after my parents began the process of turning the business over to him, my brother ended up making headlines a few days ago. However, I'm afraid there was no justification for it. Rather, it was due to the unavoidable discovery that my brother was a criminal. My parents were going to have to deal with the fallout because they had failed to trust me when I had always sensed there was something strange about him. It appears that the former employer he worked for was only a front for money laundering, and he faces additional charges along with those of a few other individuals. Since their whole gang had been apprehended, he was now in serious difficulty since, while he hadn't spoken to them in the previous 2 months, the others had named him as well. This is all I currently know, and friends and relatives have been messaging me about it non-stop since I found out. Of course, for some reason, my parents have also been making ardent attempts to contact me. They had stopped communicating with me when I left the company 2 months ago, but they are now ringing my phone non-stop. After ignoring them for a few days, I made the decision this morning to give them another call and finally have a conversation, because I had a strong suspicion that they would want me to return and provide a heartfelt apology for all the times I had previously informed them about my brother. Regretfully, my parents, being the kind that they are, chose to get off to a bad start by talking to me about my brother and the problems he was having. He was detained pending trial while the police, it seems, were looking into this at the time, due of his past. He persisted in his denials, claiming he was innocent of any involvement in the money laundering and that, in attempting to get away from them, he had really lost a significant amount of money. I was correct to assume that he was impoverished, which explains why he hadn't moved out and was living with our parents. However, my parents did not apologize to me. Instead, they began to cry and expressed how awful everything had been, not only for my brother, but for the entire family, and asked that I take some action to support them. Their arrogance and ignorance made me laugh out loud in their faces. I informed them that I would only be assisting the police at this time since I had been correct in every way. They had never bothered to listen to me, and they wanted to give their son another opportunity. They'd done what they wanted to do, therefore I was going to follow my own wishes. They began telling me that I was being unjust and that this was my family after they were fairly startled by the way I was acting. Consequently, I had to consider our reputation at the very least rather than intentionally making my brother's situation worse. They even played the business card, claiming that since he had been working closely with my parents for the previous 2 months, there was a chance that they would appear bad. As a result, I felt compelled to assist them, if only for the benefit of the family business. But regardless of my brother's character, I informed them that they had already let me go since it was clear that they liked my brother better than me. Even today, despite the fact that everyone knows there is never smoke without fire, they were still inclined to accept his version of events and his assertions that he had nothing to do with it. Aside from our parents, no one in their right mind would trust him given his past. The fact that they were phoning me seeking assistance rather than to apologize in the first place is what infuriated me the most about them. They went on to accuse me of being self-centered and to say that my only concerns were myself and my animosity towards my brother, to the point that I was unable to see the wider picture. Since the phone call went badly, why did I tell my parents that I wouldn't be assisting them in getting my brother out of trouble? Update 1. All right, so I've made the decision to disobey my parents and pursue my interests. As it is, I don't believe they have ever shown me any concern in their lives. My brother has always come first for them. It's only been in the last several years that he hasn't been in contact with them that they have begun to treat me more kindly. The only reason they had been treating me better was that they believed they wouldn't have someone to inherit the company from my dad when he retired. I don't really care what the reasons were since, now that my brother is back, I can see the difference in their behavior and recall how we used to be treated differently when we were younger. It was foolishness on my part to think differently, and nothing has changed. They haven't even expressed regret to me, and they're making me look awful for not wanting to support my brother, a known criminal. If he had been a wonderful guy, or had even bothered to be courteous to me in the last couple of months since he had returned, I might have even given him the benefit of the doubt, but even that has not occurred. We continued to have a tense relationship and hardly spoke to one another when he returned. So why should I make an effort to assist someone with whom I have no relationship whatsoever, save from a tenuous familial tie? I don't have to defend someone just because we are blood relatives, especially when I disagree with him or whatever he does. Who are my parents to accuse me of being conceited for not defending him? That's just what they had done, wasn't it? They opted to transfer the firm to my brother because, among other reasons, he was older than me and refused to recognize the years of hard work I had put in. Actually, it was because he was their beloved son rather than because he was older than me. They would have found a way to allow him to take over the company even if he had been younger than me. Thus, I don't really care about all of these claims that I'm selfish and other things. They are free to believe whatever they choose. I'm going to do what I want because I'm done with my family. In fact, I'm delighted I decided to quit the company because, after giving it some serious thinking, I've decided to go forward and start my own business. I have the money and the intelligence to come up with a respectable business plan, therefore I don't need any of them. That's what I'm going to do then. I sincerely appreciate all of the encouragement I received in the comments. I believe it was vital for me to gain some understanding so I could stop doubting myself. Update 2. Hello, I haven't spoken to my parents in a week and a day, and since then, they were prevented by me. I was delighted that neither they nor I knew anything about what was happening with my brother, so they had no means to get in touch with me even if they wanted to. Although I haven't been reached by the police, I'm sure I will be contacted to testify in favor of or against him if this case gets to trial. When that occurs, I will gladly testify against him, because I believe he ought to be put behind bars and dealt with accordingly. This time, our parents are unable to just buy his way out because of the seriousness of what he has done and the length of time he has been avoiding the repercussions of his conduct. I would be happy to witness him suffer the price this time around. But it's clear that my parents are still making a concerted effort to keep him safe. They came up to me earlier that day and said they wanted to buy me out before anyone else could come over. I spent the past few days relaxing at home, and I was still there when they came by today. I ordered them to go when I realized they were my parents waiting outside since I didn't know what to say to them. I also had no interest in talking to them since I knew they were not coming to apologize. Naturally, though, they stayed put. My dad informed me that they were only standing there and that their purpose was to haggle with me. He went on, explaining that he had realized that I was not an emotional person, so he had tried to persuade me to be sentimental and urged me to defend my family, but I was extremely puzzled. The only other option left to him was to make me a financial offer to keep quiet about my brother when it came time to testify. I was shocked when he even mentioned that he was attempting to persuade and buy me out. I couldn't believe it. Subsequently, he continued to exacerbate the situation by indicating that he was willing to provide any sum I desired. I only needed to keep my mouth shut and not to provide any testimony against him. The family would value it much since it was not a nice impression for anybody to have a brother testify against another brother and attempt to have him put in jail. He just kept talking endlessly. And once I got over my first astonishment, I told him that I was not going to take any kind of payment from him and that he had to go, or else I would call the police, and he would just wind up making things worse for my brother and himself. Subsequently, my mother yelled at me, accusing me of being conceited and saying she never thought I would behave in this manner. She went on to explain that she didn't believe my father and her had brought me up to behave in this way, acting as though I didn't value my family and being so narcissistic and self-centered. I really lost my patience at that point, and I opened the door to confront them because I was curious as to what they believed they were discussing. I had learned all of this from them, as far as I can recall, and they had nurtured me to be just like this. since they didn't appear to mind that my brother had egoistic and self-centered traits. They were the ones who had taught me that it was okay to act in that way, so why was it wrong when I was doing it? He had taken great satisfaction in being a horrible human being all of his life, and it never seemed to bother our parents. They continued to act in the same manner even now. I then informed them that, following my brother's return, they had been happy to let me leave the firm 2 months earlier since they did not believe my importance warranted my continued employment. But now they needed my assistance just because he was having problems. Regretfully, that's not how it operates. They were unaware at the time that I was a member of their family, and that this is not how you treat your relatives. But now they want me to appear like we've always been a nice family just because it suits them. I'm not usually the sort of man to lose his anger, but I was so upset that I was literally yelling at them. And they both looked astonished. Even when I do, I try not to shout at people since it simply makes me feel exhausted, but I was so furious that I had no choice. I simply shouted at them until my voice became raspy, at which point I told them I wanted them to leave and never return because if they did, I would absolutely contact the police and make their situation more worse than it was. That's when they seemed to finally see my seriousness and moved on, leaving me alone. If they do return, I'm not sure if they will or not. I don't want to deal with this situation again, therefore I'm going to have to call the police. Even though I received the closure I somewhat needed today, it was not worth the emotional toll it had on me. I don't enjoy wasting my energy or getting other people. Update 3: My brother's case is scheduled for trial the following week. I haven't spoken to my parents in a while, but of course I haven't stayed in touch with them since then. As a result, I had not been able to learn the specifics of my brother's situation, and to be honest, I had no want to. For the previous few weeks, I had only been working on developing a business plan and looking for potential investors. I had some money of my own, but I didn't want to spend them all, so I think I could succeed even without investors. Since I know that one of my uncles is rather well off and I would want to have his support, I have been talking to him about my ambitions. I didn't talk to him about it further, but it was he who first informed me about my brother, which was sort of shocking. Almost everyone in the family is aware by now that my relationship with my parents is soured, and some have even taken sides. Even though he is my dad's brother, my uncle, who had been talking to me about the business plan and telling me about my brother, is clearly on my side and has stopped talking to him as a result of the way I've been treated. He was a bit of a loudmouth. So now the whole family is aware of the fact that I informed him about how my parents had actually attempted to buy me out so that I wouldn't testify against my brother. I must admit that even those who are purportedly with my parents are quite dubious about this entire situation after all. If my brother is truly innocent, why would they want to buy me out? That's precisely the type of thing that a guilty person would attempt to accomplish. Therefore, whatever they have done, whatever they can hide. Basically, my whole family has been approaching me to ask me questions and to talk about my parents and my brother, but I haven't spoken up about anything yet. I don't want to engage in rumors and turn into the family's talking point. I won't say anything more until it's absolutely needed by the law, which will happen if I have to testify against my brother. That is not visible to me. I'm excited about it. Even though I know it will be extremely emotionally taxing, I will take action when the time comes. I have not yet been contacted. However, if the trial is about to begin, I'm confident that I'll be contacted at some time, and I'm ready for that. Version 4. Hi everyone, gentlemen. My brother's trial was held quite some time ago, and this week the result was made public. He will be spending time in jail. Though that was a long time ago, I hope my parents have learnt their lesson, and I won't claim I'm glad about it. Many of my family members have told me how angry they are and how unjust his jail is. All I can say is that he has essentially indoctrinated them for life. I have heard that they have been blogging about this since they still believe he is innocent. My parents are not ready to accept the court's verdict that he is guilty. To exacerbate the situation, I am aware that they have been neglecting the business because they have been too preoccupied with defending my brother. Many have given up and have suffered significant losses. Therefore, I suppose they may have to close shortly. I'm glad I got out of there because I might have had to participate in all of it otherwise. They attempted to buy me out, and ever since then we haven't spoken, although I did run into them on the day I was summoned to testify against my brother. As promised, I did testify against him, and they all showed signs of being outraged about it. But they remained silent, which was fortunate for me, as I wouldn't have valued it otherwise. With my brother now having to deal with the fallout from his acts, and my parents continuing to deny that he is a bad man, almost the whole family has turned against them, and they have no one else to blame but themselves for this predicament. On social media, they can never stop pleading for justice, but in actuality, it has already been done. They will continue to live in denial because they are unable to deal with that. That barely matters to me now, so good for them. Because I need to take care of my own business. 2 months ago, I was able to launch my firm thanks to investment from my uncle and a few of his acquaintances, in addition to my personal contribution. We're going to need some time to break, but things have gone well thus far. Being able to do this makes me feel incredibly proud of myself as well, as owning my own business has always been a goal of mine. And since I'm still young, I have plenty of time to build this into an empire and fulfill my childhood goals. Hopefully, I'll be able to accomplish all of the goals I have set for myself.